Hello, it is time again where the archons begin their reruns and everyone starts scattering for constellations, weapons, and most importantly, those that are newer. The game have an opportunity to get some of the most powerful and potential characters in the game. But the question that many people still ask is, are the archons worth it? And are they worth it for me? So that's exactly what I plan to cover, with the very first Archon being Zhongli, or as many people simply call him, Geodaddy. Let's start with what does Zhongli do? Well, the meat of his kit is his elemental skill, which applies a shield to the active character and even decreases physical resistance and elemental resistance by 20%, a small AoE around the active character with the shield. This allows him to protect your allies and debuff your enemies simultaneously with little to no effort. Not to mention, as an HP shielder, his base HP being one of the highest in the game allows him to absorb more than his other competitive options. Now, this alone sounds really great, and would probably entice most to pull for him if they have not already, but just wait for the competitive options. We'll start to see why maybe Zhongli might not be for you. Taking into his account his elemental burst does apply petrification, which does as it sounds. It will turn enemies to stone for a very brief amount of time at C0, but its damage is pretty negligible, even with the boost that you get at his second passive. And though you can build an on-field DPS Zhongli at the cost of his shield health and capabilities, not quite worth it. And his first passive does give you shield strength, but it is not the most fantastic stat, I will be honest, and that may be a biased opinion. So take that with a grain of salt, as shield strength really is misunderstood. Now, I mentioned his competitive options a few times now. Who are they? What do they do? What are the differences? Well, we'll actually start with a fellow Geo character of Noelle. Many people probably have this one in particular, as you get a guaranteed Noelle when you first start the game and you do your first 10 pull. If you haven't gone for that, maybe you've gotten her from other pulls. She's a 4-star that's fairly easy to get, basically guaranteed. Now, I do have my Noelle at C6, so there are some differences that will be present. However, none of these increase her defense at all. It is either healing or damage. So focusing on her shielding capabilities, what's the difference? Well, she doesn't apply that debuff that Zhongli does. However, it does allow her to heal the entire party, which is particularly helpful if you're dealing with enemies that pierce through your shield, like the Black Knights or Rift Hounds. This obviously then does scale off of her defense, which is also her main stat for her shielding capability, which you can get fairly high and competitive even with Zhongli. Another big difference is that her burst isn't a one-time damage like Zhongli. It's a very large AoE that actually synergizes with her elemental skill. She's able to do more damage over a longer amount of time while simultaneously shielding and healing the team, and is used mostly as your mainstead character that spends the most time on the field. Essentially, think of a tank or your main DPS if you build it correctly. Her passives essentially reduce cooldown of her otherwise very long cooldown on her shield, meaning you want to use her on field with her attacks. And her first passive actually passively gives you a shield when any active character falls below 30% health, that's not her. And it will last quite a while. 20 seconds, and even does more damage absorption. It is fantastic for a accidental mishap or misjudge on your enemy, or the timing while switching between characters, and is a fantastic way to ensure that you survive the encounter even with the slip up. Now, maybe that sounds like I'm hyping her up, but keep in mind as a C4, you can also get her constellations relatively easier than you can with Zhongli. The one I have, for example, is at C0, and there are benefits, but I'll go over the constellations at the end. The other option that we have is Layla, a fellow HP scaling shielder. Now, as a cryo option instead of Geo, she has more flexibility in applying cryo element to allow for vapes and freeze comps, which means outside of her shielding, she also applies an elemental factor that the other two options previously just don't. Shielding is typically more of a flex slot, which, for anyone that's not aware of what that means, typically you use your shielder within a team to kind of round it out. Place a unit there because you just need a fourth character. We're talking health-wise, with no additional weapons on either Zhongli or Layla, or artifacts, and for Layla, also at C6, no bonus to her HP from her constellations. Competitively, 11,600 for Layla and 12,965 for Zhongli, meaning how effective their shields are really come down to who has more HP in their substats when you give them artifacts. They both kind of share, if you're going for just the shield base, they both kind of share the same best in slot. Which, for anyone who's not aware, will be your Tenacity of Millilith, giving bonus HP and increasing the attack of all party members by 20% when elemental skill hits an opponent. And this is another thing I will actually cover in just a moment, but we'll get back to that. So what's the biggest difference in her elemental skill and burst compared to the other two options I've shown? Well, for her shielding capability, also on her E, it also applies every so often a shooting star, which will apply cryo and do damage. Now these shoot off in groups of 4, or it takes a moment for these to build up and charge, and then fire off. However, each member of your team using an elemental skill generates 2, so you can cut down the time of this wait significantly just by doing what you normally do. Their elemental burst is kind of an AoE that just constantly shoots out these same exact shooting stars, doing damage and applying cryo in a rather large AoE. For passives, we have a kind of similar shield strength passive here at their first one, and their second one just increases the damage of the shooting stars based on Layla's HP. All in all, she is far more similar to Zhongli than Noelle is, however is a more DPS option, or off-field damage option, with her elemental reactions and the damage coming from her shooting stars. Essentially, this breaks up all 3 of the most competitive shielders into off-field DPS, main field healing DPS, and off-field debuff. This is where it starts really getting difficult in terms of deciding if you really need or want Zhongli, or maybe skip him and pull on a different banner. So, To decide that, we're going to actually go into his best in slot artifact, Tenacity of the Millilith. Now, anyone that doesn't know what this does, a 2-piece set will give 20% HP bonus. A 4-piece set essentially will then increase the attack of all party members by 20% and their shield strength by 30% every time an elemental skill hits, and triggers even when the character is not on field. Now this is great for Zhongli, as his elemental skill will in fact trigger this, as it sort of does a pulsing motion. However, this, as a geo object, can be destroyed, so depending on the opponent you're facing, might not always be getting this buff. Comparing that to Layla, as a shielder, can use the exact same artifact set, but because her shield and elemental skill does still hit opponents, and is not a geo object that can be destroyed, you are guaranteed to have that effect at its max stack, continuously going for the entire duration of your shield without the chance of losing out on it. This is, in terms of this artifact set, better circumstantially with Layla versus bosses and larger enemies than it is Zhongli. Now, Noelle is very different. Since her shield actually scales off of defense, you want different artifacts compared to the previous. Now, the easy best 2-piece option would be 2-piece of the Husk of Opulent Dreams, giving you 30% increased defense. And after that, you're kind of free to add an attack, or even a healing bonus if you really wanted to. Though I don't 100% recommend that, it would be an option with her healing capabilities. Regardless, she has a lot more flexibility in terms of what to use for her shield, and you can throw in safely options to do damage, the most out of all 3 of these options. Next up, I'm going to talk about weapons. Free-to-play options, and even 5-star options. Now, Zhongli's 5-star weapon on the banner isn't actually his best option. In fact, it's not really great if you're using him as a shielder. Maybe as an on-field DPS, but if that's not what you're looking for, then honestly, skip that weapon banner. It's not worth it for you and Zhongli. Many people run him actually with Staff of Homa for its HP increase, but to be honest, his best in slot is Black Tassel, a 3-star staff that's very easy to get with an HP substat, which goes higher than what I can show here, as it does reach level 90. This is the best way to max out shield capabilities. Layla, however, struggles in this department for using as a shield, as we do not have options for HP swords. At the moment, something like Primordial Jade Cutter, which gives it similar increase in HP, or the Key, 20% increase again, and an HP substat. These are not easy to get your hands on, and as such, aren't very optional on her. The only other things I would really recommend is maybe Energy Recharge to make use of her burst, or Elemental Mastery to get that extra bit of damage when doing Vape. That's kind of the only options that we have with her at the moment. Meaning she really does lose out in weapon options as a shielder. But she has other options in damage potential off field. We have a similar issue with Noelle, however there is a free-to-play option. Now for Noelle, we actually do have a Claymore option with a defense substat that increases attack and defense on hits with normal and charge. This is easily Noelle's best in slot, and increases both damage and shielding capabilities. and is almost entirely free to play. As your most accessible character, if you did not get the free Layla a few months ago, this makes an easy shield capability that maybe your team wants or needs without the need of pulling for Zhongli. However, if you're looking for something more off-field, maybe not your go-to option. Finally, constellations. Now, for my Zhongli, I am at C0. C1 is a option that allows you to have more of your rocks, pillars. Having 2 on field is nice, however, doesn't contribute significantly to his overall kit or shield usage. For your C2, you'd be able to give everyone around you a shield, which is great for co-op. However, if you don't have any friends that you play with, then kind of falls short. C3 obviously increases the level. C4 increases the AoE of your burst and damage. C4 again increases level of your burst, and C6 actually does give you some healing as your shield takes damage, but it is not a significant amount or reliable. For the price tag that comes with C6, I can't recommend going anywhere past C1 unless you play a lot of co-op, in which case I would say C2 is the stopping point to reach. Next we have Layla. As a C4 character, her constellations are far easier to get at far lower of a price range. Her C1 will flat out increase your shield by 20%, while also giving every other character around you shield. And though it's not equally as great as yours, as it will only have 35% of the absorption that you normally have, it's still comparable to Zhongli's C2 at C1 and increases your own shielding potential even outside of co-op. Far more of an option than C2. Layla's C2 also then restores energy to Layla, which is another quality of life improvement. Not fantastic, but not terrible. C3 increases the skill level. C4 allows everyone to have normal and charged attack damage increased based on Layla's max HP of 5%. So essentially you take Layla's HP, you get 5% of that as a bonus. But, however, it only lasts 3 seconds and is removed basically right after a charged normal attack and has to wait until the stars start shooting off again. It sounds great, but quite honestly, you don't get a lot of use out of this. It's a very minimal increase occasionally, not fantastic. C5 again increases level, and then you have C6, which just gives a flat 40% increase to damage and allows you to generate your shooting stars faster by 20%. This kind of goes in with her C4, however, it still makes it incredibly niche. Meaning, if you get up to C3 to increase your level of your shield, I would say that is the perfect stopping point, and still significantly less of a price point, and realistically reachable than Zhongli even at C1. Lastly, but not least, we have Noelle. Again, as a C4, she is far easier to get constellations for than Zhongli. C1 allows you to have guaranteed healing on hit when using both your skill and burst at the same time. meaning what she does uniquely, she does very well after C1, and it is a fantastic constellation to have. Now, that wasn't enough. C2 decreases stamina consumption of her charge attack and increases her charge attack damage by 15%. Basically, it's just a flat out damage bonus. Fantastic. C3 increases her shield level. C4 actually adds damage effects for 400 Noelle's attack anytime the duration of her shield ends or it's destroyed. Essentially, you punish people for attacking you and actually managing to destroy your shield, meaning it's not a loss even if her shield capability isn't completely on par with Layla or Zhongli. C5 again increases level, and then C6 will actually increase Noelle attack by an additional 50% of her defense. And every single opponent defeated during the skill's duration, and by the way, sweeping time specifically, which is her burst, then adds 1 second to the duration up to 10 seconds, meaning again, damage increase across the board, doing exactly what you'd be doing with her anyway. This is just so you know what other options are there and available to you. If you want to pull for Zhongli, absolutely go for it. He's a fantastic character and you can't go wrong with having him in your team and on your account. But just keep in mind, if you're pulling him to be a shielder and you may already have these characters, maybe save the Primo Gems and give them a try before. That way, maybe you'll get another character that your account needs more, or maybe you'll find that either of these fit what you're looking for better.